Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the cool, candlelit corridors of ancient Rome, not through gladiator tunnels or toga parties, but into something far more sleepy. Imagine trudging through the marble echo of a public archive, where the only danger is a papyrus splinter and the occasional sandal squeak on polished stone. You pass dusty shelves packed with scrolls, not stacked alphabetically or by author, but by smell. Yep, you're about to enter the world of Roman librarians who used scented oil to organize information. Welcome to the Dewey Decimal's strangely perfumed cousin. Don't worry, there won't be a test on this. Honestly, you probably won't survive this archive tour without dozing off halfway through a scroll on tax records written in goat ink. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so drop your location and the local time in the comments, especially if you're already half asleep in Saskatchewan. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're stepping through a colonnade into one of the lesser-known buildings of Rome's intellectual heart, the Bibliotheca Pacis, the Library of Peace. Not nearly as famous as the Colosseum or the Forum, and yet every bit as bustling, well, as bustling as a scroll library can be. No one yells here, no dramatic speeches, just the shuffling of tunics and the whisper of parchment unrolling, like a lazy snake exhaling. You inhale, and then pause. Is that lavender? Your eyes scan the rows of niches where scrolls are carefully tucked, each tied with colored ribbon. And scented, not like air freshener scented. No, these oils were applied with intention. Lavender for philosophy, rose for legal doctrine, myrrh for military dispatches. At least, that's what the surviving inventories suggest. Modern historians still argue whether this was a standardized system or more like, smells like Cicero. Here's how it might have worked. Each scroll was stored inside a wooden cubby called an armarium, and lightly dabbed with scented oil, not doused. Mind you, just enough that when a librarian walked by, they could pick up on the aroma and zero in on, say, the herbal tang of medical scrolls, or the sharp resin of tactical battle reports. Think of it like trying to find your favorite flavored tea in the dark, except the tea is handwritten tax law from 18 BCE. The oils themselves were stored in thin-necked clay bottles called unguentaria, each sealed with wax to keep the scent pure. And oh, the politics of those bottles. Some librarians were fiercely territorial about their blends. One infamous record describes a feud between two scent clerks over access to imported saffron. It escalated to a passive-aggressive prank involving mustard oil. No one was hurt, except one unfortunate scroll on naval treaties that now smells like hot dogs. You slide deeper into the archive, ducking under a lintel carved with the inscription, Scientia odoribus vincit, knowledge conquers through smell. Maybe not Rome's most enduring motto, but at least they were trying. Here's a curious detail. These weren't cheap oils. Sourcing them meant drawing from Rome's sprawling trade networks: Egypt for frankincense, Syria for cinnamon oil, North Africa for citrus. This wasn't just about organization, it was a flex. The very air of the archive whispered empire. A patron wandering the halls might inhale sandalwood and think, ah, the scent of conquest. Or maybe just sneeze and leave. Interestingly, this aromatic system also served a semi-practical purpose: pest control. Mice and insects weren't fans of certain oils, so scrolls rubbed in mint or eucalyptus were less likely to be nibbled, accidentally inhaled too deeply near the law section. And you'd get a sinus cleanse worthy of a gladiator's sneeze. You come to a section guarded not by a centurion, but a very bored-looking teenager with ink-stained fingers and the resigned slouch of someone who's been asked to recatalog scrolls since sunrise. He glances up, then gestures toward the wall of armarium behind him. Don't mix the myrrh with the basil, he mumbles, without even looking. Too late. You already picked up a scroll labeled De Piscibus Marinis on marine fish, and your nose is telling you this scroll reeks of cinnamon. Someone has clearly made a mistake. Unless Roman fisheries were into holiday spice. That's the trouble, isn't it? No barcodes, no titles on spines, just smell and memory. And depending on how well the oils aged or Whether the scrolls absorbed moisture from a particularly humid Roman summer, that lemon balm equals poetry system could go wildly off the rails. A sudden breeze, or a librarian with a cold, could turn cataloging into chaos. Still, it worked. Sort of. The idea was that smell helped bridge gaps in literacy. Not everyone in Rome could read, but more people could be trained to recognize scent combinations. So you didn't need to parse Latin legalese to find the section on tenant farming. You just needed to follow your nose to the grassy oregano scent marking agriculture. Even Cicero, that tireless quote machine, supposedly scoffed at the practice. Knowledge, like perfume, must be absorbed, not dabbed on. He probably never said, but it sounds close enough. And now, the scent is fading, not because the system didn't work, but because time is slow and oil is fleeting. These scrolls haven't been dabbed in centuries. Their scent memory, like yours tonight, is barely hanging on. You press your fingers gently to the edges of a scroll. The wax seal cracks. Inside, a report on aqueduct repairs in 12 CE smells faintly of old time and bureaucracy. You breathe deep. The dust dances in the golden lamplight. You are, for a few minutes more, a visitor in the only library where a sneeze might reorganize history. You shuffle forward, careful not to knock over a clay vial resting on a low shelf. It's warm in here, not from sunlight, but from the low-burning oil lamps nestled between columns, each one flickering like a sleepy thought. Your nose twitches again, this time olive oil, unmistakably, but laced with something floral and sharp, possibly hyssop, possibly foot balm. It's hard to tell anymore. Roman libraries, especially the bigger ones like the Bibliotheca Pacis, weren't built with quiet contemplation in mind. They were semi-public, semi-political, and semi-sensory overload. People came to read, yes, but also to be seen reading, which in ancient Rome was essentially Instagram, but with sandals and fewer filters. And the librarians, they had to make sense of all of it, scrolls piling in from all corners of the empire, texts duplicated by hand, and categories that changed every time a new emperor declared grapes more important than law. Enter the oils, not just because they smelled nice. That was the bonus. Their true role was weirdly practical, to sort scrolls by scent the way we sort files by folder color or apps by icon. When you walked into a Roman library, the system didn't shout at you. It wafted. Subtle waves of aroma helped guide you. Bergamot to the left, near philosophy. Sage, by the history alcove. Lemon for poetry. Don't ask why poetry smelled like lemon. Historians still argue whether it was due to a famous scroll called Lemon Songs of the Tiber, which might have been a misreading of lament, or if it was just that lemon oil was the cheapest. One fun fact, the olive oil base wasn't just a Roman thing. Ancient Egyptians, Persians, and Greeks all used oil blends to preserve papyrus and discourage bugs. But only the Romans took it that step further and used the scent as metadata. You wouldn't label a scroll Military Treatises, Volume 6. You'd infuse it with cypress and expect the reader to know what cypress meant. This, of course, created problems. Let's say you're a low-level librarian, name's probably Lucius, everything's probably sore, and someone delivers a new shipment of scrolls from Alexandria. Your job, dab them with the correct oil and assign them a spot. But what if you run out of frankincense and the only thing left is a knockoff rosemary blend from Gaul? Congratulations! You've just categorized a philosophical dissertation on metaphysics under regional herbology. The confusion this caused, legendary. There are records dry, bureaucratic records, but still of entire collections misfiled due to scent substitutions. A scroll describing military formations was once slotted under botany because it smelled faintly of pine. Some say that's how the Battle of the Rhine was lost. Others say the scroll just had tree metaphors. Either way, pine should not be that confusing. And let's talk about blends. The real art wasn't in single-note scents, it was in the layering. A skilled scent clerk could mix a scroll's fragrance to reflect its nuance. A scroll on agricultural law might carry a base of olive with a touch of oregano and a whisper of citron. It told readers, this is a legal document, but about vegetables. Of course, if you sneezed while blending, you might knock in a bit of camphor, and suddenly you filed it under medicine. Oops, one bizarre outlier. The scrolls related to plumbing. Yes, Rome had plumbing manuals, detailed ones. According to fringe papyri found near Pompeii, they were sometimes infused with violet oil. Why violet? No one knows. Some scholars think it was to mask the actual smell of plumbing work. Others think a librarian got sarcastic and labeled them delicate work. And the olive oil itself, not your basic kitchen drizzle. This was libum grade refined, filtered, and sometimes aged. There was a hierarchy: standard oil for day-to-day records, perfumed blends for important legal documents, and ultra-rare infusions for state secrets. The scrolls concerning the Vestal Virgins, for example, were reportedly stored in cedar oil-infused boxes wrapped in silk and layered with dried rose petals. Glamorous. Completely impractical, but very on-brand for Rome. You pause by a scroll that looks older than most. The scent is hard to pin down, something like damp hay and regret. It's labeled De Piscibus Dormientibus on sleeping fish. You unroll it a little, expecting philosophy. Nope. It's a detailed list of fish species that can be stunned by hitting the water hard enough, scented with marjoram. Because why not? Here's another quirky tidbit. Not all scent codes were static. Some libraries rotated them seasonally, like fashion lines. Spring might bring out the florals for poetry. Winter, the darker, muskier scents for tragedy. That meant a scroll could shift categories without ever moving shelves just by being re-oiled. Efficient. Questionable. Pretty. Definitely. Confusing. Oh yes. And of course, the oils aged. Scent fades. Oils spoil. After a few months, what once smelled like chamomile might smell like vinegar and mold, which, unintentionally, became another signal. You could tell the oldest, least read texts by how sour they smelled. Some scrolls practically repelled visitors. One historian jokingly called this the scent of academic failure. And then there's you, standing here, surrounded by ancient Roman scrolls, each one a tiny time capsule soaked in oil and assumptions. You sniff the air again. Is that bay leaf or just your imagination? The librarian from earlier coughs in the corner, waves a stick of rosemary at a scroll rack like a wand, and mutters something about reclassification. You pretend not to notice. It's better this way. You didn't come here for logic. You came to drift through forgotten corners of Rome, lulled by a filing system that only made sense if you inhaled deeply and didn't ask questions. The scents swirl gently in the air, each one a whisper from the past, trying to remind you where it belongs. Or maybe just reminding you that Rome, in all its glory, even organized its boredom with flair. You press onward, following your nose through the maze of scrolls. The scent shifts again, sweet, spicy, and a little smoky, cinnamon, clove, a hint of something burnt, like a failed candle or a very confused pie crust. You squint up at a shelf marked with a faint etching. Philosophia. Philosophy. Sure, but does it normally smell like spiced cake? In the ancient Roman mind, it actually might have. Philosophy was considered a warming pursuit for the soul, something that elevated a person above petty affairs. And so, the scrolls reflecting those lofty ideas, they were infused with warming oils, cinnamon, sometimes cardamom, rarely nutmeg when they could get it. The olfactory logic was clear: warm ideas, warm smells, at least, mostly clear. Historians still argue whether the scent system was ever truly standardized. Was cinnamon always philosophy? Or did one particular library just have a surplus and get creative? There's no surviving manual titled How to Perfume Your Papyrus Like a Pro. Everything we know comes from fragmentary inventory lists, marginal scribbles, and the occasional note about scenting errors that caused panic among very serious librarians. Imagine being one of those librarians. You're wearing a wool tunic that smells faintly of mildew and crushed figs. Your job: to wander the aisles every morning with a tray of unguentaria, checking which scrolls need a scent refresh. It's a little like being the janitor of metaphysics. You dab cinnamon oil onto one scroll, almond oil onto another, all while trying to remember which scent means stoicism and which means rhetoric. You mess up one time and someone walks away thinking Seneca was a pastry chef. Then there were the scent-matching rituals. Senior librarians were trained, yes, trained to identify a scroll's theme just by inhaling. There are records of competitions, especially in Alexandria and Carthage. where scent clerks would be blindfolded and handed scrolls. Their task: identify the scent blend and the scrolls category. The winner got a fresh tunic and, sometimes, dinner with the head librarian who probably smelled like ink and anxiety. But here's the catch. The human nose is inconsistent. Some people are super smellers, others, well, if you've ever tried to identify a candle scent while battling a sinus infection, you get the idea. One poor scribe, Quintus of Brundisium, famously confused lavender for sage and ended up filing military orders under herbal remedies. That misfiling wasn't discovered for 2 years, by which point the troops had marched in the wrong direction, encountered no battle, and settled down to grow herbs. You pass a nook where the air is especially thick. This section, marked externus scriptus, foreign writings, has its own particular bouquet. Heavy sandalwood, sharp cedar, and something vaguely sulfurous, probably imported scrolls from Parthia or India, sealed with strange gums and spices. It's rumored that some of these foreign texts were intentionally misscented to hide their contents from the general public. A whiff of sulfur might deter the average Roman reader, or at least signal that these were scrolls meant for special readers only. Librarians walked a fine line between curators and gatekeepers. Scented oil wasn't just a filing tool, it was code. A power play. You could elevate a scroll's importance by giving it a rare scent frankincense for state papers, perhaps, or bury it in obscurity with something cheap and bland. There's even speculation that libraries used unpleasant scents, like asafoetida, to mark texts deemed dangerous or heretical, kind of like a smelly warning label. Read this and your reputation will stink. You stop at one scroll that looks unusually clean. No ribbons, no tag, just rolled papyrus, tied with a bit of faded green thread. You pick it up, no scent, completely neutral. It's eerily blank in the nose, which in this world of nose-based navigation is almost unnerving. Scrolls without scent. They were considered lost, not literally, but lost to the system, unguided, uncatalogued. They could sit for years without being read simply because no one knew where to place them. Scentless scrolls were often neglected, ignored like that one uncle who never bathes and always brings boiled eggs to parties. The Roman preference for scented order reflected their obsession with hierarchy. Everything had a place. People, scrolls, gods, even smells. You didn't just read philosophy. You found the scent of it, followed the trail, and inhaled the knowledge. Learning was a sensory experience, multi-layered, perfumed, and, let's face it, a bit ridiculous in execution. Yet there's something undeniably elegant about it. 2. You picture a young apprentice, probably named Gaius, wandering the library in early morning light, carrying a wax tablet of inventory and a tray of oils. He pauses by each shelf, sniffs delicately, dabs precisely, and updates his notes. His world is one of quiet control, where information has an aroma and scent is truth. But even Gaius isn't immune to error. One day, he misreads a symbol and re-oils a batch of legal documents with jasmine instead of thyme. For the next month, everyone assumes these are wedding songs. 2 scrolls end up being recited at an actual wedding. A senator's face turns purple. Gaius is reassigned to the ventilation corridor. The system wasn't foolproof, but it had its charm. And in a way, its flaws were part of the experience. Scent wasn't just a filing tool. It was memory, emotion, atmosphere. A scented scroll could transport you faster than the words themselves. That whiff of bay leaf might remind a retired general of old campaigns. A trace of honeyed clover might make a bored bureaucrat sigh wistfully and pretend he's reading love poetry instead of wheat quotas. And so here you are, nose deep in nostalgia, inhaling knowledge with every slow breath. You pause by a windowless arch, just tall enough to duck through. A new wing. The air here feels heavier. You step forward and, wait, that's not sandalwood. It's citrus. Strong. Sharp. You're about to walk into the most problematic part of this whole scented system, the scrolls that aged badly. But we'll save that tangy disaster for next time. The citrus hits you full in the face, bright, bitter, almost stinging. It's not the kind of cheerful orange zest scent you'd expect from a spring festival or a fruit stall. No, this is aged citrus. Sharp, fermented, like someone soaked a scroll in lemon juice, left it in the sun, and then got really proud of it. You take another cautious step into the narrow aisle. The scent doesn't get better. It gets deeper, more intense, like it's been marinating in history. You pause in front of a shelf with scrolls tied in pale yellow ribbon. The ties are fraying, the scroll edges curled with moisture, and you realize you've reached the citrus-coated section. This, according to what remains of old Roman library records, was the domain of agriculture, farming techniques, crop yields, seed rotations, and goat population reports, all wrapped in the acidic embrace of lemon and orange oil. Someone clearly thought citrus symbolized freshness, growth, fertility, which is fair, until the scent went wrong. See, citrus oil doesn't age well, not when it's exposed to light, humidity, and time. Over the centuries, those scrolls didn't just fade, they soured. Literally, the very oil that once made them stand out became their undoing. It soaked deeper into the parchment, attracting moisture, feeding mildew. The scrolls turned soft at the corners, fragile in the middle, and weirdly sticky in parts. And here's the kicker. The mold that eventually formed, it picked up the citrus scent, amplified it. So what you're smelling now isn't just the ghost of a once lemony oil. It's lemon plus fungus. Nature's own commentary on human filing systems. There's actually a surviving anecdote in a scribbled margin from a scroll now housed in Naples. It reads, "More or less, filed under citrus, found rot. Blamed Titus." It's unclear who Titus was, but it's safe to say he wasn't having a great day. Historians still argue whether the use of citrus oil was a genuine attempt at systematizing knowledge or a trend gone wild. Some claim it started as a joke. A librarian in Ostia dabbed orange oil on a report about orchard thefts, and the idea caught on. Others insist there was an official edict linking scent families with subject matter, but no edict has ever been found. Only oily residue and bad decisions. You pass a scroll that appears to be wrapped in linen, possibly as a last-ditch attempt to keep the citrus at bay. You gently peel it back. The scroll crackles like old onion skin. Inside, a long-winded dissertation on olive tree pruning techniques. The script is still legible, barely, but the scent, it's overpowering. Someone must have over-applied. You resist the urge to sneeze. This, by the way, wasn't uncommon. Scrolls that absorbed too much oil would sometimes be rotated out of circulation, not due to content but because they became too fragrant. One elderly philosopher supposedly complained that a scroll he'd requested smelled louder than it read. That scroll was refiled. Under Maisk, you stop at a pedestal in the middle of the aisle. One of those tall reading stands carved from dark olive wood. A thick leather cloth rests atop it, likely used to hold more fragile scrolls. You unfurl a nearby document with care. Its title is written in firm, looping script. On the soil qualities of Greater Illyria. Riveting. You take a slow inhale. Beneath the citrus, there's something else. Earthy. Maybe cumin. No. Possibly just dust. Dust and regret. Now, here's something quirky. Scrolls didn't just soak up oil, they remembered it. Even after the surface scent faded, the papyrus fibers clung to the aroma. That meant even centuries later, archaeologists could sometimes identify a scroll's subject matter by its lingering scent, long before they decoded the text. In one dig in Herculaneum, for instance, they found a bundle of charred scrolls, partially carbonized by the eruption of Vesuvius. The papyrus was unreadable, but several scrolls still released faint citrus and bay when warmed by breath. From that, researchers guessed they were part of a bureaucratic cache on land surveys. Kind of impressive, kind of tragic. Of course, modern scholars don't all buy that theory. Some say the scent residues could be contamination from nearby oils, not original categorization. Others argue that certain papyri were naturally aromatic depending on their region of origin. And there are still debates over whether some scent signatures are just the smell of ancient mildew. Back in your aisle, the citrus grows less distinct. Your nose is adjusting, or maybe the mold is winning. Either way, you're starting to notice the subtle differences. Some scrolls veer orange, others lean bitter lime, and one very far back gives off a medicinal tang that makes you take a step back. That's the tricky part with organic systems. They don't stay consistent. Oils break down. Scents mutate. And what once meant poetry might now mean danger, respiratory risk. You wonder how the librarians kept up. Did they constantly sniff test every scroll? Did they carry little reference jars like sommeliers, doing side-by-side comparisons? One fragmentary note from a scroll logistics manual titled T Ordine Librorum hints at a rotation schedule. Oils were to be reapplied every third month, except during damp tides or outbreaks of book fever. No one knows what book fever actually was. Possibly a mold allergy. Possibly an excuse to take a few days off. And then there were the scrolls wrapped in scented cloths instead of being oiled directly, a sort of preservation trick favored by northern provinces. Cloths soaked in citrus oil were tied around scroll bundles, then sealed with wax tablets marked with scent symbols. The problem? Those bundles didn't breathe. The scent stayed and fermented. When opened decades later, they released such pungent clouds that some scribes reportedly fainted. Whether from shock, lack of ventilation, or sheer boredom is unclear. You brush past one final shelf, dizzy from the citrus ghosts. The last scroll you touch is cool, damp, and whisper light. You lift it, and the ribbon slips off. The scroll begins to unroll in your hands. A brief line flashes before your eyes. On the proper harvest of imperial lemons. Then it crumbles, leaving a smear of soft yellow pulp on your fingertips. It's enough. You step back, wiping your hands on your robe, the scent of spoiled oranges clinging stubbornly to your sleeves. And as you leave the aisle behind, you realize scrolls may rot, systems may fail, but Rome's attempt to make knowledge smell right was at least memorable. Even if some of those memories stink, you exit the citrus aisle, blinking through the invisible fog of ancient zest and mold, and instinctively steer toward the corner of the library where the air feels thicker, muskier. Gone are the bright fruit notes. Now, something dense and ancient saturates the air. Myrrh, maybe, or burnt resin. You sniff again and instantly regret it. Your sinuses tighten. Your eyes sting. You've arrived at the state secrets section. It isn't labeled as such. Roman archives weren't in the habit of announcing sensitive documents. But here, tucked behind a thick drapery embroidered with stylized laurels, the scrolls are different, bound tighter, sealed with wax emblems. And above all, they smell defensive. The scent of myrrh, while famously used for embalming and sacred rituals, also signaled restricted access. According to pieced-together library lore, it was used for high-level imperial documents, senatorial decrees, tax audits, military strategies, and correspondence not meant for public sniffing. You brush the drape aside and are hit with a wall of smell so potent it feels solid. It's like walking through incense fog at a very serious funeral. Historians still argue whether this intense use of myrrh was chosen for preservation, intimidation, or just because it was expensive. Some scholars believe that overpowering scents like myrrh and styrax served as a natural deterrent. If you weren't supposed to be reading these scrolls, you physically couldn't. Your eyes watered, your throat closed. You turned and walked away, scent as security. And then there were the rumors. Certain scrolls were so heavily perfumed, it was said they left a residue on anyone who handled them. An oily mark, hard to wash off. That identified you as someone who'd been poking around in forbidden knowledge, a scent-based alarm system. Whether that was true or just a tale librarians told to scare off curious apprentices, well, it worked. You reach for one of the larger scrolls, wrapped in a darker leather than usual. Its ribbon is black, the wax seal stamped with a faded eagle clutching lightning bolts. The scroll smells like a religious procession on a bad day. Beneath the myrrh, there's an undertone of aged meat and something vaguely metallic. You recoil, then chuckle quietly. They really didn't want anyone reading this one. And yet, curiosity wins. You gently unroll it, one crackling inch at a time. The script is faint, curling at the edges. It's a report, possibly a transcript of a Senate meeting, discussing grain shipments diverted during a famine. Dates, names, locations. Nothing scandalous by today's standards, but in ancient Rome, sensitive enough to be buried under layers of smell. You run a finger along the edge and feel a slight stickiness. The oil is still embedded in the fibers. You're now marked. In some metaphorical and possibly olfactory sense, as a reader of state secrets. Congratulations! If this were 63 CE, you'd probably be questioned by someone in sandals holding a short sword. There's also a strategic advantage to all this. Scrolls with specific scent blends could be passed through libraries without drawing attention if the librarian knew the code. Myrrh and clove. Probably state records. Myrrh and cypress. Possibly religious. Myrrh and garlic. Hopefully just a mistake. But one never knows. And yes, garlic oil did find its way into scroll preservation from time to time, usually in the wrong places. One fragment from a port city library details a disastrous experiment with culinary categorization. The theory sent the scrolls of cookbooks with actual cooking smells. The result, rodents. So many rodents. That entire wing was closed, fumigated with sulfur smoke, and converted into a storage closet. But back to your hidden alcove. You crouch near the floor where the scent thins. Here, the older scrolls live the ones whose oil has faded to a memory. They smell less like power and more like papyrus and dust. These are probably imperial memos never opened, dead letters in every sense. A single scroll sits at the edge of a shelf, slightly unrolled. You nudge it gently. The script is hurried, like a scribe trying to get through a rough draft. It smells of beeswax. No, something faintly sweet and sharp. Poppy seed oil. Maybe, definitely not myrrh. Someone hid this scroll here. It's not labeled, not sealed. Just a few lines. Possibly notes about troop movements along the northern frontier. If so, this wasn't just state business. It was battlefield logistics, and it was slipped into the do not disturb zone under the cover of scent. Here's a lesser-known trick. By mimicking the dominant scent in a section, say, adding just enough myrrh to fool the nose, you could hide a scroll in plain sight, a kind of olfactory camouflage. Fringe historians believe this was a form of passive rebellion, or perhaps covert messaging. Some go so far as to suggest that early Christian scrolls were smuggled into pagan libraries this way, doused with decoy oils to keep them safe. Maybe, maybe not. But it's fun to imagine a young scribe, hunched over a forbidden text, whispering prayers and waving a vial of diluted cedar oil to throw off the librarian. You rise and glance around. No one else is here, just you, the burning oil lamps, and the heavy silence of secrets long past. Your clothes now carry the weight of a dozen scents. Lemon, mint, myrrh, ink, and maybe a dash of mold. It clings to you like a whispered oath. You take one last look at the sealed scrolls. Some may never have been opened. Some were possibly sealed again by trembling hands, and some may not be scrolls at all, but bundles of decoy parchment meant to throw off prying noses. The curtain brushes your shoulder as you exit the alcove. You exhale, blinking back the sting from the myrrh. The rest of the library feels different now. Softer, friendlier. Or maybe it's just that you survived the scented labyrinth of Rome's dirtiest secrets. You deserve a break. Maybe a scroll that smells like mint next. You drift into a cooler corridor, nose still throbbing slightly from the sensory ambush of the myrrh chamber. The scent here is gentler, almost pleasant. Sweet herbs, soft florals, lavender, and maybe a touch of chamomile. Now we're talking, but don't let the fragrance fool you. This section smells lovely. Yes, but the history, not so lovely. Because tucked among these scrolls of soothing scent lies something far more pungent. Librarian drama, delicious, scandalous, ink-splattered politics. You wouldn't think the world of scroll shelving would come with backstabbing, sabotage, and epic feuds. And yet, this is where the true rot of the Roman library system sets in. Not the literal kind, but the metaphorical stink of ambition, rivalry, and sabotage by scent. You wander between the shelves, tracing your fingers across scrolls tied in lilac-colored ribbon. This is supposedly the philosophy section, though more than a few of these scrolls smell off. One smells like old cheese, one is aggressively minty, and one, disturbingly, smells like wet goat. You pull it down. It's a treatise on moral virtue. Hilarious. Here's the problem. Once librarians started using scent as the Dewey decimal system, they also started misusing it. Some did it by accident. Many didn't. Political rivals could sabotage entire collections by applying the wrong oils to targeted scrolls. Want someone's treatise on ethics to vanish from public attention? Rub it with dill oil and sneak it into agriculture. Want to bury a speech speech denouncing the emperor, douse it with garlic, and file it under culinary arts, which, as we've already established, is now mostly mice. This wasn't just petty vandalism. It was information control. One recorded incident, scribbled into the margin of a damaged scroll now in Milan, details a scroll on senatorial reform that mysteriously ended up in the viticulture aisle, reeking of fermented grape must. The scroll remained unread for 2 years. By the time it was rediscovered, the political moment had passed. Reforms delayed, power preserved, all thanks to a splash of red wine oil. Historians still argue whether these acts were isolated pranks or coordinated efforts. Was there an underground group of scent saboteurs, a rogue librarian league with perfume vials and hidden pockets? One fringe theory even suggests there were official scent censors, appointed by powerful Roman elites to subtly reorganize inconvenient knowledge. No public burnings, no arrests, just a quiet shuffling of oils and a gentle rerouting of truth. One name keeps popping up in the murky records of scroll manipulation: Aulus Pollio. A senior librarian with a penchant for cardamom and vengeance, it's unclear whether he was hero or villain, or maybe both, depending on the scroll. Some documents credit him with introducing the first multi-note scent coding system. Others blame him for intentionally misclassifying nearly half the philosophical texts during Emperor Domitian's reign. There's even a preserved wax tablet, dug up from a trash pit outside Ostia, that reads, "Pollio has ruined the poetry section. Everything smells like bean soup. May Jupiter curse his nostrils." So, not a universally beloved figure. And it wasn't just the scent coding. Scrolls were relabeled, wax seals scraped off, titles rewritten in different handwriting. In one notorious case, a legal treatise on land reform was disguised as a pastoral poem, thanks to a dab of lavender oil and a forged title scroll. The ruse wasn't discovered for nearly a decade, and by then the land had been seized, redistributed, and thoroughly mismanaged. A fiasco with a floral finish. You pick up a scroll that smells like mint, strong mint. You're about to assume it's medical, but no. It's Seneca. The Seneca, the guy who wrote about anger while secretly seething. His writings are supposed to be stored under lavender standard scent for Stoic philosophy. But this scroll has clearly been re-oiled. Why? Well, some believe that Seneca's more biting essays were considered too critical of Roman excess. So, a clever librarian with imperial sympathies might have recategorized his spicier scrolls into herbal medicine, hoping to throw off casual readers. Others say Seneca himself preferred the mint scent, said it cut through hypocrisy. Again, historians disagree. Nobody can smell the past without a little bias. Even authors got in on the scent game. Elite scribes would bribe librarians to use premium oils on their works: rose, myrrh, even imported sandalwood from India. Think of it like putting your book on the front table of a bookstore, except instead of a shelf, it's a smell. The better the scent, the more attention. Scrolls that reeked of luxury got picked up first. Humble works, left to mildew in the common aisle. This created an unofficial scent economy within the library. High-demand oils were rationed. Some librarians hoarded them. Others diluted them with cheaper blends, hoping no one would notice. One inventory ledger from the 2nd century actually includes a theft report. 5 measures of rose oil missing. Suspect Pollio. Again, as you wander deeper into this politically perfumed corner of the library, you find a scroll whose scent is unlike the others. Sharp, bitter, and strangely oily, almost like vinegar. You hold it up. The ribbon is torn. The wax seal melted and resealed. You crack it open. The scroll is a political satire, brutal, mocking at least 3 senators by name, and written in a tone so biting you feel secondhand shame. Whoever wrote this wanted it read. Whoever refiled it really didn't. This is the paradox of Rome's scented library system. On one hand, it was designed to make information more accessible to guide, preserve, and classify. On the other hand, it became a weapon, a way to suppress, confuse, and manipulate without burning a single scroll. Just change the oil. Just nudge it into the wrong shelf. So now, as the lavender fades and the mint lingers, you realize something important. This isn't just a story of smells. It's a story of control, of people who understood the power of knowledge and found ways to bend it with a drop of oil and a flick of the wrist. You breathe in again. This time, the scent is muddled, faded. Politics always leaves behind a mess. The air is changing again. You've moved past the political battlegrounds of re-scented scrolls and librarian vendettas, and now you're walking into a section that feels softer, almost sacred. The scents are gentler here, honeyed, woody, faintly resinous, cedar, frankincense, a trace of clove. The atmosphere shifts from scandal to ceremony. You're in the religiones et cultus wing, the writings on religion and ritual, and this is where things get even stranger. Because in this part of the library, scent wasn't just organizational, it was theological. Scent was prayer. The Roman world was saturated in ritual. Every god had their day, every house its altar, and every sacrifice its smoke. The libraries, especially the larger ones funded by emperors or major temples, reflected this obsession. Scrolls about the gods weren't merely placed on shelves. They were enshrined. You pass a small alcove carved into the wall, its edges stained dark from centuries of oil rubbings. A bowl once used for anointing sits cracked in its recess, and the scrolls, most are wrapped in linen, embroidered with sigils, their ends dipped in resin. Their scent, unlike anywhere else in the library, is deeply intentional, layered, almost ritualistic. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were oiled as part of religious rites or simply to indicate their sacred content. Some say certain scents like cedarwood and frankincense acted as offerings in their own right, awakening the scrolls before being read aloud in rituals. Others believe it was just another filing tool, albeit one cloaked in spiritual flair. But let's be honest, when you pick up a scroll that smells like temple incense and see it labeled Rites of the Bona Dea, it's hard not to believe the scent means something. You reach for one now. It's ribbon the color of faded bone. The scroll is cold to the touch. Its scent, sweet, sharp, almost holy. The first line reads, "When entering the sacred grove, leave sandals and pride behind." You smile? Sounds about right. This section of the library wasn't for everyone. Access was often restricted. Women couldn't read the rites of certain male priesthoods. Men were forbidden from even glancing at the inner workings of the Vestal Virgin's sacred calendar. In fact, some scrolls here were double-sealed, first with wax, then with layers of pungent resinous oil designed to repel the curious. You didn't just read sacred texts, you earned the right to smell them. You spot one scroll encased in a protective wooden sheath, its outer bark inscribed with crescent moons and laurel branches. Its scent is nearly overwhelming. A heady blend of juniper and clove, possibly with musk or an animal-based oil like civet. It's a scroll on augury, the interpretation of bird signs. You wonder what kind of bird reading requires that much clove. Another scroll is marked with faint burn rings along its edge. You unfurl it slightly. Inside, the scribe has written a litany for a purification rite, each stanza bracketed with tiny soot smudges. The scent is pine tar and salt, possibly used during coastal festivals to cleanse the sea air before shipping season, or just to impress Neptune. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some temples had their own libraries and their own scent rules. The Temple of Mars reportedly kept scrolls of war prayers stored in containers smoked with cinnamon bark, while the priestesses of Vesta preferred rosemary and rose oil for ritual purity scrolls. A traveling reader would have had to sniff their way through the divine hierarchy, one god at a time. And that opened the door for divine confusion. One fragmentary complaint from a librarian in Pompeii reads, roughly, new apprentice oiled Martian hymns with Venus blend, festival procession ruined. Blame Carbo. We don't know who Carbo was, but it's safe to say he probably wasn't invited to the next equinox feast. Because to the Romans, scent wasn't just identification, it was invocation. To smell a god's scent was to call their attention, and mislabeling a scroll meant accidentally praying to the wrong deity. At best, you got weird looks. At worst, you got thunderbolts. So, to prevent divine miscommunication, librarians developed special scent blends, proprietaries, Hereditary's mixes, the Jupiter blend, for example, may have included oak moss, sage, and myrrh. The Diana blend likely featured cypress, lavender, and a floral top note. These blends weren't just recipes, they were rituals, mixed during certain moon phases, stored in amphorae inscribed with prayers, guarded by scent clerks like state secrets. You pause at one of these scent amphorae now empty. Of course, its neck cracked and its seal broken centuries ago, but a ghost of scent lingers near it, a dry floral breeze, touched with spice. You close your eyes and imagine it, fresh, wafting through the temple corridors, seeping into scrolls, binding scent to script like a whispered chant. There's even evidence that some scrolls were read aloud while being re-scented, not just re-oiled silently, but recited, line by line, with each passage sealed by a dab of frankincense or a swirl of camphor, a sort of olfactory liturgy. The idea was that scent would bind the meaning to the material. If words fade, perhaps scent endures. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. Scrolls misscented by accident or absorbed foreign oils through handling could confuse rituals. One temple in Gaul accidentally performed a marriage rite using a scroll of funeral prayers. The resulting ceremony was considered both blessed and cursed, which seems about right for most marriages. Honestly, and here's a darker twist, some scrolls were intentionally misscented to disrupt rival cults. If you scented a scroll of lunar rites with sun resin, you could supposedly cancel its effectiveness. Was it real theology or just olfactory trolling? Hard to say. But in a world where gods judge not only actions but intentions and possibly aroma, you didn't want to take the risk. You take a slow breath. The scent in this chamber is thick, but not unpleasant. It wraps around you like warm fog, as if the gods themselves are watching from above, curious to see whether you understand their scrolls or just sniff and move on. Your fingertips now carry hints of a dozen oils. Your robes smell faintly of rosemary, frankincense, and maybe a touch of owl droppings from that scroll on nocturnal omens. The religious wing, you realize, isn't just a library. It's a temple in disguise, a place where reading was worship and scent was sacred speech. You step out slowly, head spinning slightly, not from the gods, probably just the cloves. You're overdue for something light, maybe some scrolls on cooking next, or hygiene, or both. Assuming, of course, you don't get misfiled along the way. You take a left at a carved marble column, its surface etched with vine leaves, and something that looks suspiciously like a nose, and walk straight into a cloud of basil. It's sharp, peppery, and layered with something green and damp parsley. Maybe a hint of oregano. You're suddenly hungry, which is either a brilliant sensory association or a deeply unfortunate trap. You've entered the Roman library's domestic corner. Scrolls on daily life, home management, and most notably cooking. Here, the scrolls don't smell sacred or secret. They smell like dinner. The shelves are low, wide, and slightly sticky. Scrolls here are bound with linen cords, often flecked with faded oil stains. And wait, are those crumbs? Oh no. Someone definitely used these scrolls mid-recipe, probably while elbow-deep in garum sauce. The Roman kitchen was no joke. Rich households employed full-time cooks. Poorer citizens made do with street vendors or open-fire pit recipes passed down through generations. And the scrolls reflected that range. From elaborate banquets to barley stew with whatever you could find under the bed, the culinary archives were surprisingly detailed, and they were scented accordingly. One scroll here reeks of fennel and black pepper, another of thyme and vinegar. It's an aromatic assault that would have been oddly helpful to ancient readers. Can't remember where the pickling scroll is? Follow your nose. Need instructions on roasting dormice? Find the one that smells like crushed coriander and shame. The Romans knew that scent could do more than file scrolls. It could enhance memory. That was the real genius of oiling cookbooks. Smell helped you remember the steps. You sniffed a scroll and the recipe came back 3 sprigs of lovage, a dash of honey. Roast until the skin crisps. It was a recipe not just for food, but for memory itself. Still, not everyone agreed on how best to use scent in kitchen scrolls. Historians still argue whether Culinary libraries followed a standard oiling system or simply reflected what ingredients were on hand. Some evidence suggests there was a brief attempt at scent taxonomy: spices for meat dishes, herbs for vegetables, citrus for desserts. But this quickly broke down when scribes got hungry or messy, and then there were the mistakes. One surviving fragment, partially burned and now housed in the ruins of a villa in Gaeta, contains a clear note in the margins: do not scent fish scrolls with mint. Reader vomited. Practical advice. Deeply relatable. You pass a scroll tied with gold thread. Fancy? You unroll it carefully, and the smell hits you instantly. Rose, saffron, and a faint whiff of goat. You suppress a gag. The scroll is titled On Feasting the Emperor: Recipes for Public Decency and Private Display. Sounds intense. It includes a layered meat pie shaped like a fish, filled with spiced eggs, and topped with gold leaf. A showstopper. Certainly, possibly edible. The rose oil is just for scent, not flavor. But you start to understand why no one read this scroll twice. You find another scroll with a simpler smell: olive oil and rosemary. The classic. It's a bread recipe, written in cheerful loops by someone clearly passionate about crust. You like this scroll. It feels honest. Hungry, but honest. Now, here's where things get truly absurd. Some libraries experimented with what can only be described as edible scrolls. That's not to say people were chewing papyrus like beef jerky, but they did create recipe scrolls etched into thin sheets of hardened pastry. Yes, you heard that right. The scroll was the dish. You baked it, read it, and then dipped it in wine and ate it. Only two such scrolls survive, both more fossil than food. But the fact that anyone thought to do this suggests the Romans understood scent and knowledge as something you could taste. Literally. A scroll you could study and digest. And then, of course, came the sabotage. Because where there's food, there's rivalry. You see, cooks, especially those serving wealthy homes, guarded their recipes with religious fervor. Some even scented false recipe scrolls with appealing oils, then filled them with wrong measurements. A trickle of salt where there should be a bucket. Entire banquet dishes ruined, thanks to competitive culinary misinformation. One scribe famously confessed to oiling a bogus scroll with saffron and hiding it among real sweets recipes. The scroll called for fish sauce and pine nuts and custard. No one spoke to him for a month. These kitchen feuds made their way into the archives. Some scrolls bear X marks or warning notes like, "Do not trust this pastry," or "Marcia's version is better." You pick up a scroll labeled Ovis Dulcis Sweet Eggs. It smells like nutmeg. Inside, a second hand has scrawled, "More honey, less ego." Possibly the best recipe advice ever given, but it wasn't all chaos. Some librarians tried to introduce structure. One scent clerk proposed a full olfactory filing system based on dish type. Bread got rosemary, meat, thyme, fish. By dessert, rose or cinnamon. A noble idea, until librarians began applying personal taste. One scroll on lentil soup smells entirely like anise. There's no anise in the ingredients. The librarian just liked it. Eventually, some temples, especially those of Ceres and Bacchus, adopted culinary scrolls into their ritual libraries. Food wasn't just survival, it was sacred. Certain feasts were reenacted annually, and scrolls guiding those ceremonies were stored alongside religious texts, sometimes cross-scented. One scroll you glance at now smells like barley and frankincense. Half recipe, half prayer. It's all a bit beautiful, a little messy, very Roman. You take one last sniff. The room smells like someone cooked dinner inside a spice merchant's robe. You imagine a world where you navigate your whole day by scent, finding your grocery list by the smell of vinegar, your bills by the stench of burnt garlic, and your love letters by cinnamon. Perhaps the culinary corner fades behind you, and your stomach growls. You're craving roasted chestnuts now, or olives, or even that ridiculous fish-shaped meat pie. But instead of food, you press forward toward another corner of the library, one that smells oddly clean, and where nothing is ever as clean as it smells. The transition is almost alarming. From the riotous herb and garlic whirlpool of the culinary wing, you step into an area that smells sterile, not blank, but unmistakably intentional, like something was scrubbed. wiped, covered with just enough pleasant oil to hide whatever came before. Welcome to the hygiene and medicine aisle. And let's be clear, when Romans talked about hygiene, they didn't mean minty toothpaste and bubble baths. This was a world of vinegar washes, communal sponges, and soap that doubled as industrial degreaser, which makes the current scent like lavender, a whiff of myrtle. Perhaps even almond oil feel more like marketing than truth. You pass rows of scrolls tied with pale green cords. The air smells clean, but not fresh. It's the scent equivalent of polite conversation, designed to calm, to reassure, to say, nothing gross happens here, which is absolutely untrue. One scroll reads, on the extraction of ear blockages with heated olive oil. Another, worms of the eyelids, a summer affliction. Charming. You pause, sniff, and note that despite its horrifying title, the eyelid scroll smells like chamomile. Deliberate misdirection. Perhaps, or a librarian with a very twisted sense of humor. This wing was both practical and aspirational. Rome valued cleanliness, but their definition varied wildly depending on class, wealth, and how close you lived to a public bath. Medical knowledge, meanwhile, was a glorious mixture of actual science, superstition, and dangerous guesses, and it was all categorized by scent. Historians still argue whether the use of clean scents lavender, rosemary, mint was a way to align scrolls with ideals, rather than contents. In other words, did hygiene scrolls really smell clean, or were they made to smell clean so people would read them? A fringe theory suggests the scent itself was the medicine, that scrolls were not just sources of instruction, but vessels of healing oiled with aromatic compounds meant to soothe the body while soothing the mind. One ancient commentary describes a scroll being waved under the nose of a fevered patient to clear the humors by scented wisdom. Was that literal, poetic, a placebo? Historians shrug. You pick up a scroll wrapped in linen that's slightly crunchy with old oil. It smells of juniper, resin, and faint vinegar. Inside, a guide to wound cleaning techniques. Soak, swab, wrap. The handwriting is clear, almost stern. Notes in the margins suggest the scroll was frequently used, possibly copied by multiple healers. And, fascinatingly, it's cataloged under cleansing, not medicine, the scent coding. Then, may have grouped texts by purpose, not body part, which worked until it didn't. See, the hygiene wing eventually absorbed too many scrolls. Recipes for soaps and oils overlapped with cosmetic treatments, which overlapped with actual medicine, which overlapped with religious purification rites, which circled back to hygiene again. The scent system designed for clarity collapsed under the weight of its own cleanliness. One poor librarian, a certain Terentius Felix, left behind a small clay tablet detailing his frustration. I find scrolls for removing lice next to those for skin ointments. One smells of almond, the other of sulfur. The mix is unpleasant. You can only imagine. Another oddity, certain ailments were scented to match what they were trying to fix. Scrolls on digestion, fennel and anise, headaches, lavender or rose, insomnia, poppy seed. The theory being that reading the scroll and breathing the scent might trigger healing, or at least sleep, which was arguably the same thing if you snored loud enough. You pause at a scroll bound with a reddish cord. The oil has soaked through the fibers. Strong scent. Cinnamon and clove, medical or cosmetic. The title reads, on the whitening of teeth and the preservation of fresh breaths. Oh, dental scrolls, an especially cursed niche of the hygiene genre. This one recommends rinsing with goat milk and ash, followed by chewing parsley and rubbing the tongue with linen and wine. Honestly, not the worst thing in the library. The scroll still smells decent, too, probably because the alternative rotting tooth instructions were oiled more aggressively than others. No one wanted to handle a scroll that reminded them of Uncle Gaius's molars. And now, something more controversial, tucked into a dusty corner, almost buried, is a scroll that smells like soap, actual soap, fat and lime and something bitter underneath. You gingerly unroll it. It's an instruction manual for making household soap from rendered animal fat and ash. Simple, brutal, surprisingly effective. But what's odd is that the scroll includes instructions for scenting the finished product. lavender, cedar, rose, mint. The same scents used for filing scrolls were now part of daily life. A complete olfactory feedback loop. You wash with mint-scented soap, then find the scroll about mint-scented soap in the mint-scented section. Efficient, slightly cultish, very Roman. Of course, not all scent choices were benign. There's record of a noblewoman named Scratched Out who demanded her private hygiene scrolls be oiled only with imported Egyptian lotus oil. Why? Because she believed anything scented with rosemary made her age faster. Superstition, vanity, probably both. Her scrolls, when later found, were relocated to the religious wing due to their heady floral scent and mistaken identity as sacred rites of Aphrodite. No wonder prayers went unanswered. The deeper you go into the hygiene aisle, the more surreal it becomes. One scroll simply titled, "Sweat smells faintly of camphor and despair." Another, "The Feet of Soldiers," reads like a cry for help and is marked with a wax seal shaped like a sandal. You suspect that scroll was consulted often, possibly too often. And then you stumble across a scroll that doesn't smell clean at all. It smells like tar, thick, smoky, unnatural. You pull it out very slowly and find it's a warning scroll, a guide for identifying contaminated baths, symptoms of public plague pools, notes on when to not enter the water. The tar scent was likely added to repel readers, to mark it as dangerous, to make you think twice. That's the brilliance and peril of the scented system. It guided, yes, but it also judged. Some scrolls were made to welcome, others were marked as untouchable, and the oils used became shorthand for both caution and command. You step back from the shelf, arms lightly perfumed with a patchwork of mint, lavender, vinegar, soap, and something you're hoping isn't foot oil. This was supposed to be the clean wing. Instead, it leaves you wondering what's been scrubbed away and what's still lingering under the surface. You inhale deeply, smell nothing, just for a moment, and then faint. Creeping in like a whisper comes something darker, musky, resinous, almost smoky. The funeral scrolls are next. The scent arrives before the scrolls do. A slow, smoldering blend of cedar wood, smoked resin, old incense, and ash. Not the clean white kind from paper or bone. This is deeper, oily, funereal. You've entered the death wing. Roman funerary customs were elaborate and theatrical. Death was not hidden. It was paraded, perfumed, processed, and, most importantly, documented. And here, tucked into the quietest quadrant of the library, are the scrolls that try to make sense of it all. Burial rites, mourning rituals, ghost placation spells. Every flickering thought Rome ever had about what came after the last breath. And it all smells like the world's most respectful bonfire. Your footfalls soften, not because the floor changes, but because the air demands it. Even the silence here feels weighty, perfumed with memory and dread. You reach out and touch a scroll sealed with dark wax. Its ribbon is black, tied in a knot you instinctively don't want to untie. The scent is frankincense, dense and powdery, clinging to the papyrus like a last breath. You do open it, though, because of course you do. Inside, the standard ritual order for a patrician funeral, cloaks worn, wails timed, coins placed on the eyes, one each, unless the family was feeling cheap. And yes, the scroll includes instructions for how much myrrh to burn and where to place the urn if cremated. Spoiler alert, never under a fig tree. Something about root rot and angry spirits. You make a mental note. Unlike the other wings, the scent system here wasn't just for classification, it was part of the ritual itself. Scrolls on cremation always smelled smoky, often infused with pine pitch or charred bark. Burial texts leaned towards cedar or cypress. Mourning prayers were softer, oiled with iris or mastic. And scrolls about death omens. Those got the strangest treatment of all musk, bitumen, or in one disturbing case, oil rendered from goose fat. Why goose? No one agrees. Some say geese were messengers to the underworld. Others think it was just convenient. Either way, that scroll now lives in its own sealed box. No one's requested it in a century. Probably for the best. You pass a section titled Malorum Auspitia Bad Omens. This is where things get spooky. One scroll describes what to do if a crow lands on your windowsill and stares at you for more than 3 seconds. Another outlines counter rites for when someone sneezes during a wedding. There's even a scroll on funerary echoes. The belief that if your name is whispered in a crypt without your permission, your soul begins to age early. That one smells like dust, wool, and something uncomfortably metallic. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were meant as genuine instructions or just recorded folklore. Some claim they were archived for anthropological reasons, Rome's version of things villagers say. Others insist they were used regularly, especially during seasons of plague or military defeat, when bad omens seem to breed like flies. There's also a scroll here that no one seems to agree on. It's heavily damaged, smells like burned honeycomb and pine. The remaining lines are poetic, almost too poetic for a ritual text. Some believe it's a eulogy. Others say it's a curse, a warning, written by a grieving mother to the gods. Or perhaps at the gods, it ends mid-sentence. You took him, and so I will, and that's it. You step back. Nearby, there's a scroll clearly meant for the masses. No black ribbon, no smoke scent. It smells like simple olive oil. It's a budget guide. How to prepare a burial without embarrassing the family. It covers everything from dressing the body to what prayers you can skip if you're in a hurry. There's even a chart comparing burial costs in different districts of Rome. Apparently, Trastevere was the cheapest, if you didn't mind the occasional flooding. But here's the odd part, this scroll. It's one of the most worn in the section. Thumbed, smudged, oiled over and over. You realize it might have saved more grief than any of the other texts in this wing. Death, after all, came for everyone. Even the poor needed instructions, especially the poor. And that brings you to another mystery. Tucked at the end of a shelf is a box, wooden, plain, but when you open it, the scent is unmistakable, burnt rosemary and pitch. You recoil slightly, then peer inside. It's not a scroll. It's a collection of fragments, bits of papyrus, wax chips, seals snapped in half. Someone tried to destroy these scrolls, but the oil preserved parts of them. You see lines like, "Let his name be removed," and "bound in the earth." And never remembered, these aren't just funeral scrolls. They're erasure rituals. Rare, dangerous rites meant to unremember someone, used in extreme disgrace, sometimes ordered by emperors, sometimes enacted by families too ashamed to mourn. These scrolls were supposed to disappear, but scent, unlike ink, lingers. And that's the irony. Even the forgotten leave a trace. Even here, where silence is the loudest thing in the room, you can smell rebellion. A final scroll catches your eye. Bound in red silk, an honor scroll meant for public recitation at a funeral. It smells glorious, like saffron, sandalwood, wine. Inside, it recounts the life of a midwife named Valeria, who delivered more than 400 children and once laughed in the face of Pluto. The scribe drew tiny laurels in the corners of the script. Someone loved her, enough to record her legacy, to scent it, to protect it. You hold the scroll for a moment, then slide it gently back. The Deathwing isn't frightening. Not really. It's a story, one told through scent, scroll by scroll. Not about endings, but about how people remembered, or how they tried not to. As you leave, the smoky perfume lingers on your sleeves. You don't brush it off. You earned it. By now, your robe smells like an antique apothecary. A dozen oils cling to the fibers: lavender from hygiene scrolls, fennel from recipes, myrrh from funerals. And yet, as you wander onward, the air begins to shift again. Not lighter, not heavier, busier. You're in the administrative wing now. The scent here is deceptively simple. Leather, beeswax, a trace of bay laurel, and perhaps bitter orange peel. It's the bureaucratic cologne of Roman governance. Taxes, census records, land titles, decrees. This is where the empire did its paperwork, and where the scent system faced one of its greatest challenges: how to make bureaucracy smell like something. Scrolls in this section were utilitarian, yes, but they were also vital. And because they weren't glamorous, no sacred rites, no glorious battles, no goose-fat omens. They were scented mostly for efficiency. The idea was simple: prevent mix-ups, minimize retrieval time, and help overworked librarians avoid losing their minds in the wall of Form 37B. Civic drainage responsibilities. You reach for a scroll with a stiff cord and a seal shaped like a tax collector's ring. It smells like citrus rind and leather. Inside, a municipal water usage record. It's thrilling, utterly thrilling. Did you know Gaius of Regio III used 19 amphorae of water, more than was legal in 74 CE? Scandalous. But you get the idea. This was about organization, not drama. One scroll nearby, cracked and flaking with age, holds census data from a coastal village. It smells like bay laurel, sharp and cleaned, used for administrative classification, and possibly because laurel was symbolic of order and victory. You imagine the scent helped clerks pick the right scroll quickly, in a room that smelled otherwise like wax, sweat, and ink-stained panic. Now, here's where things get interesting. Because Roman bureaucracy wasn't just about law, it was also about prestige. Elite families had records of lineage, land holdings, and political favors. These scrolls were oiled with richer, more impressive scents: sandalwood, SAE, amber, even saffron in rare cases, not for filing purposes. No, just to remind whoever opened them that this family matters. You examine one such scroll, sealed in red wax and tied with bronze-dusted twine. It smells like warm cedar and something you can't quite place: fig leaf. Scribe's cologne. Inside, the lineage of the Caecili Metelli clan, stretching back generations, with exaggerated flourishes and likely invented titles. One entry, Domina Livia, mistress of the horse and star counter of Mars. Historians still argue whether that title was ceremonial or complete nonsense. Scent wasn't just functional here. It became status. One scroll from a minor nobleman was reportedly soaked in imported rose oil before being submitted to the Senate as a land dispute petition. It was promptly rejected, but the smell apparently lingered in the archives for weeks. No one read anything stored nearby for fear of rose contagion. Naturally, this led to scent sabotage. Lesser families would sneak rose oil onto rivals' tax records to confuse clerks. Others spice census scrolls with vinegar to discourage audits. Some even invented entire filing scents just to bury competitors' claims under a pile of misleading fragrance. One famous feud involved the Licini and the Fabii. The Licini had their land scrolls scented with laurel and myrrh, respectable, strong, vaguely divine. The Fabii responded by switching the scent in the storage urn to bitter fennel. The result, both families' documents were relocated to agriculture, then forgotten during a storage reshuffle. Lawsuits ensued. Nobody got their land back, but the fennel smelled great. The government eventually tried to standardize the scent codes. Edicts were issued. Official scrolls were to be scented only with beeswax and bay laurel. No exceptions. Anyone caught using myrrh on a tax form was fined. Anyone found oiling letters to the Senate with anything suggestive or exotic was publicly mocked in the forum. But humans are creative. Aromatic accidents became common. Oops, I spilled cinnamon oil on the military payroll scroll. Oh no, the land registry smells like saffron again. Did someone set fire to the olive oil urn next to the census? It was bureaucracy meets perfumery meets passive-aggressive sabotage. And then there's the matter of the whispers. Tucked behind the official records, historians found a set of scrolls that don't seem to belong. No ribbons, minimal seals, faintly scented, barely anything. These scrolls contain veiled messages, unsigned letters, warnings. Some believe this was an underground messaging system for officials who wanted to pass notes without being noticed. Their trick: scent neutrality. While everything else reeked of citrus and bay, these secret scrolls used diluted olive oil or no oil at all, making them practically invisible to scent-sorting clerks. A missing aroma became a message in itself. If it didn't smell, it mattered. You glance over one now. It smells like nothing, just dry, aged papyrus. Inside, the text is jagged, rushed. His name is not on the list. Check again before sundown. No context, no signature. Probably about taxes, possibly about murder. You decide not to dig further. Even with all these manipulations, the scent filing system worked remarkably well for a time. The scented classification of civic scrolls increased retrieval speed by up to 40%, according to one contemporary scribe's tablet. Of course, he also wrote that scroll sniffing gave him nosebleeds, so results may vary. Still, you can't help but admire the quiet genius of it. A world where smell guided law, where one whiff could signal wheat tariffs, marriage contracts, or border disputes. It's bureaucracy by fragrance, Rome's most absurd triumph. As you wander to the edge of the wing, you catch the faintest breeze of vinegar again. Someone's scroll has been mislabeled, or not mislabeled at all. Maybe just hidden in a plain scent. Either way, your brain is swirling with citrus and laurel, and you're ready for something with a little more imagination. You turn toward the next row of shelves, and almost immediately, the scent shifts. Thicker now, musty, spiced, a strange fusion of sandalwood, ink, and anxiety. You've reached the dreamers. The philosophers are next. Sandalwood. It creeps in gently at first, woody. Dry, like old temples and closed rooms full of whispers. Then you catch hints of cinnamon bark, beeswax, and something vaguely citrusy, maybe bergamot or dried orange peel. It's the aroma of thought, of debate, of scrolls that ask questions without caring if there are answers. You've entered the philosophical wing. Here, scent isn't just an index or a memory aid. It's almost symbolic. A scroll scented with sandalwood and clove isn't just about ethics, it is ethics. The same way an unoiled scroll on Stoicism might reflect the doctrine itself. Dry, plain, stripped of indulgence, a literal embodiment of principle through perfume. You stroll past the wide, low shelves, noting how sparse they are compared to the bureaucratic crush. Fewer scrolls, but longer ones, some nearly as tall as a child when unfurled. Here, Romans wrestled with truth, love, death, nature, time, and occasionally, how many olives were too many for breakfast. The philosophers had range, and their librarians, they had opinions, because unlike tax records or funeral rites, philosophical scrolls were constantly reorganized. One week, all the Stoics might be under sage oil. The next, someone would recategorize them under cypress. Why? Because cypress smells more indifferent. That was an actual note discovered on a scent clerk's tablet. Too much sage gives the impression of hope. Unstoic. Recommend cypress for emotional neutrality. Historians still argue whether the scent shifts in the philosophy wing reflect genuine filing decisions or petty librarian feuds. One theory suggests that Epicurean texts were intentionally moved next to the hygiene scrolls because a scent clerk thought pleasure and soap went together. Another claims Platonist works were relocated near the temple texts for celestial alignment and sandalwood balance. You reach for a scroll titled On the Distance Between Thought and Action. Its scent, saffron and cedar, luxurious, but grounded. You open it, expecting metaphors. Instead, it begins with a list of birds and how long they hesitate before flight. You smile. Philosophers were nothing if not peculiar. Another scroll smells like crushed fig leaf and burnt parchment. Inside, an unnamed writer wonders whether memories are smoke from the fires of reality or shadows of unrealized futures. You can almost hear him sipping diluted wine and staring dramatically into a fountain. And then you hit the big names. Seneca's Scrolls. Heavily copied and preserved. Smell of rosemary and frankincense, probably from too much handling by readers trying to inhale his wisdom. One of them includes marginal notes clearly written by someone who disagrees with everything. Useless. Too much virtue. Try again. The scent clerk appears to have tried to settle the dispute by re-oiling the scroll with a neutral blend. The result is chaotic. Rosemary, clove, mint, and a base note of sheer irritation. You suspect this scroll has witnessed many arguments. Then there's the scroll marked Cicero, Dreams and the State. It smells like polished wood and dried thyme. The title promises insights. The scroll delivers complex syntax and a debate about celestial justice that will definitely put you to sleep in under 10 minutes. Perfect bedtime material. Really. But among the canonical heavyweights are stranger gems. One scroll, oiled with neroli and ink black myrrh, is simply titled, If You Were a God, Would You Laugh? It's unsigned. Possibly a forgery. Possibly a child's question passed off as philosophy, but it lingers in the air longer than the rest. You can't stop thinking about it. Another scroll, cracked down the center, smells like seawater and wet stone. It debates whether people living inland dream differently than people near the ocean. It cites wave patterns and the consistency of dream reptiles. You are charmed, also slightly concerned. And then, because the philosophical wing would not be complete without it, you find the scented scroll of disagreement. Yes, that's its real title, or at least the one scribbled across the outer edge in shaky handwriting. It smells like everything. Layer upon layer of oils. Cinnamon, pine, mint, laurel, smoke, lavender, camphor. You open it carefully, and inside is a compilation of notes by scent clerks arguing about how to classify philosophical texts. One writes, Epicurus must smell of sweetness. He praises pleasure. Another, no, he denies desire. Use vinegar. A third scrawls, can we stop scenting ideas like soup recipes? A fourth, Cicero deserves nothing but olive oil and shame. The scroll ends with a plea, let each mind smell as it chooses, or none at all. It's strangely moving, and it hints at a deeper problem. Because scent, you realize, is rarely neutral. To assign scent is to assign meaning. You're not just categorizing thoughts, you're branding them. Philosophy scrolls weren't just read. They were interpreted through the nose, and that caused problems. One school of thought believed that certain oils could influence readers' essentially olfactory bias. If you read a Stoic text while inhaling relaxing lavender, would you take it more seriously than if it smelled like spoiled bay leaves? Could a whiff of saffron elevate a mediocre poem? Could a reader be nudged toward an ideology by an invisible perfume? You can see the debate still raging. Scentless in the margins. Some scrolls were even stored in sealed urns, unscented until requested, to prevent pre-reading bias. A few scent clerks refused to oil anything from the new naturalists at all, claiming their logic stank already. That insult apparently sparked a short-lived scroll-burning rebellion in a provincial library, where several very old but very pungent philosophical scrolls were used as kindling. But the scent always returns. Even unoiled papyrus absorbs the air around it. The arguments may fade, but the musk remains. You pause at the final scroll in this section. It smells like nothing you've encountered before, a strange mix of beeswax, old thyme, and maybe ink-drenched sandalwood. Inside is a single question. If scent records time, what happens to memory when the fragrance fades? You don't have an answer, and neither did they. But as the scent drifts upward, faint and steady, you feel a kind of peace. The philosophers never promise certainty, only a well-scented path through the confusion. You walk on, past arguments and asides, toward a quieter scent now, softer, older. You're headed for the scrolls on childhood. The smell hits you gently, like the soft exhale of a lullaby. It's a warm, sweet blend honeyed milk, dried chamomile, beeswax, maybe even a faint puff of cinnamon. There's a whisper of linen too, like sun-warmed cloth that's been folded and stored for someone small. After the incense-soaked death rites and sandalwood-soaked philosophical crises, this new aroma feels like a hug. You've reached the childhood wing, tucked low along the northern alcove of the library, almost as if on purpose. This corner houses Rome's records of youth, teachings, lullabies, early education, birthing rites, and all the things people hoped a small life might become. The shelves are shorter, the scrolls often smaller, decorated in faded inks with tiny animal doodles or star symbols. And, of course, the scentwork here was more tender than anywhere else. One scroll, bound in a ribbon of soft green and smelling faintly of goat's milk and marjoram, catches your eye. It's a birthing guide for the comfort of the young mother and the safe arrival of the infant. Inside, instructions blend prayers with medical advice. Swaddle the newborn in warm cloth. Place fig leaves above the door to protect against wandering spirits. Press olive oil gently along the infant's spine to encourage strength. The scroll is water-stained and slightly wrinkled, as if someone once clutched it during a storm or labor. Historians still argue whether scent in these scrolls was primarily for the child, the parent, or the scribe. Did chamomile help soothe infants during readings? Did sage oil offer symbolic protection? Or was it all just wishful thinking wrapped in good intentions? One fringe theory, entirely unproven, yet oddly poetic, suggests that some of these scrolls were scented to mimic the natural smell of a nursing mother, to help a motherless child fall asleep. No evidence, just a persistent rumor. But standing here, you almost want it to be true. You pass a scroll with a gentle aroma of pear and rosemary. It's a children's primer, basic Latin letters, numbers, animal sounds. The scribe had a sense of humor. One passage, B is for boss. The cow says nothing. It contemplates existence. Another scroll, more worn, contains lullabies. Some are surprisingly philosophical. Stars above, quiet below. Sleep while your questions grow. You hum the rhythm to yourself, slow and steady. As the scent of warmed beeswax settles in the air, not every scroll here is soft. Though there are manuals, training guides for young noble boys destined for oratory or politics. These scrolls smell sharper, laurel, citrus, sometimes even vinegar. 1. Titled Of Memory and Recitation, advises children be taught to associate each lesson with a scent, so the smell alone might later trigger recall. Sound familiar? You pick up a scroll used to teach ethics through fables. It smells of fennel and clove perhaps to help children stay awake. The stories inside are vivid. One tells of a lizard who lies to a raven and ends up stuck inside a fig for eternity. Another features a clever mouse who teaches a senator how to wash properly. You hope that one's based on real events. And then, there are the scrolls for grief. Tiny, soft-bound, and dusted with oils too delicate to name. One is simply titled, For the Little Ones Who Return Too Soon. You don't open it. You don't need to. Its scent, a nearly invisible mix of dried petals and pine, tells you all you need to know. It's not just a scroll, it's a sigh. A small, necessary goodbye preserved in perfume. These texts were handled gently, sometimes annotated by parents, sometimes by tutors, often by no one at all. Some show signs of being held in lap after lap, others remain nearly pristine, perhaps intended for children who never arrived. And yet, there's joy here too. You find a scroll marked with a wax seal in the shape of a duckling. That's new. It smells like apples and worn parchment. The title, Games for Days Too Rainy for the Forum. You laugh. It includes instructions for a hop game, a mud drawing contest, and something that might be early hide and seek. Except players must leave behind scented tokens, rose petals, mint sprigs to help others track them. The scroll suggests that the stronger your scent, the braver your hiding place. Of course, not all childhood scrolls were meant for the children themselves. Many were parenting guides, some better than others. One scroll, tied with stiff cord and oiled heavily with thyme, insists children be woken before dawn to train the soul for hardship. Another, more relaxed, recommends letting them sleep until the scent of baked barley fills the air. You prefer the second approach? You stumble across a particularly fragile scroll, scented with lavender and faint smoke. A warning scroll. It outlines signs of illness in infants. Pale lips, shallow breath. The text is clinical, but the scent reveals the truth. It's trying to stay calm. The oil choice is no accident. It's grief wrapped in linen and optimism. Some scrolls are clearly heirlooms. 1. Written in looping, joyful script, is titled, To My Son, When You Are Grown. The scent is rich, spikenard and honey. Inside, advice on living well, avoiding pompous friends, choosing a wife with good ankles, and how to cheat respectfully at dice. A father's heart preserved in laughter and oil. Another scroll sits in a carved cedar box. Inside, you find a collection of early scribbles, perhaps a child's first attempts at writing. They're barely legible, but the scent is unmistakable. Milk, olive oil, and the faintest hint of rose. You get the sense that whoever saved this scroll wasn't a scholar, just someone who couldn't bear to throw it away. The scent system in the childhood wing wasn't about logic. It was about emotion. These oils weren't always carefully chosen. They were instinctive. A splash of marjoram because it reminded someone of home. A dab of lavender because a child smiled when they smelled it. Filing was less about order and more about memory. In this wing, scent stopped being a tool and became love. You linger a while longer, breathing in stories and songs that were never meant to outlive the children they served. But somehow, they did. Eventually, the scent begins to change again. The sweetness fades, replaced by something sharper: ink, sweat, ambition. You're headed for the scrolls of war. The honeyed chamomile of childhood fades behind you like a memory wrapped in linen. In its place, steel, sweat, resin, dust. There's even a faint trace of iron, not rusted, not old, but hot, like a blade pulled from the forge. This is no accident. The scent that marks this wing is meant to do one thing: wake you up. You've arrived at the scrolls of war. There's no softness here. No cradle songs or perfumed lullabies. These scrolls smell of command tents, leather straps, pine pitch, and determination. It's as if each text is flexing, posturing, proving itself before you even read the title. A silent contest of bravado, but scented. Your eyes land first on a scroll tied in rawhide. The wax seal is stamped with a Roman eagle. The smell, cypress and olive wood, earthy and sharp. Inside, marching instructions, formation diagrams, notes on when to shout, when to stay silent. You imagine commanders breathing the scent in by torchlight, barking orders, marking borders. One line reads, "Discipline is the spine. Without it, the sword cannot swing." You wouldn't argue. Historians still argue whether the scents in this wing were for function or flair. One theory claims the oils were applied to harden the scroll's resin, and pine pitch offered water resistance in the field. Another theory, more widely accepted, suggests scent was used to align specific battle strategies with regional assignments. Scrolls meant for campaigns in the north were oiled with cedar and myrrh. Those for desert campaigns, with myrtle and sage. But the most common theory, ego. Commanders wanted their legacies to smell as grand as they sounded. A victorious general wasn't just praised in bronze. His war reports were perfumed with saffron, laurel, even crushed cinnamon bark. And if you could afford imported oils, your battles, win or lose, were bound to be remembered. You open a scroll marked the Siege of Mascula. The scent is powerful. Black pine, hot beeswax, and smoke. The report within is brutal. Stone throwers, starvation, tunnels dug by candlelight. The writing is crisp, unemotional. It doesn't flinch. One line, "The wind turned, and their fires suffocated their own." You close it gently and set it back. Then, a sharp contrast, a scroll wrapped in red-dyed twine. The smell is lighter, rosemary and something floral. You raise an eyebrow. Inside, a field report from a Roman medical officer. He describes caring for wounded legionaries under hailstorms of slingstone. The scroll is direct, almost tender. No limb severed in war is without honor. But still, the men cry for home. There's a quiet beauty in the scent choice, a way of saying, war wounds need not always stink of blood and pitch. And yet, many scrolls here do. One scroll in particular smells of thick tar and sulfur. You almost don't open it. But curiosity wins. Inside, instructions for creating Greek fire, or its closest Roman imitation. The recipe is vague, deliberately so, but mentions oil of naphtha, lime, and the bark of the dark fig. The scroll warns, if wind is present, this flame cannot be controlled. It does not die with water. Charming. You roll it shut with haste. You catch another scent, dried blood and fennel. No, wait, that's just sweat and iron. It's a training manual, one used to prepare boys' children for entry into the legions. The tone is rigid. Hesitation kills. Fear is the wine of cowards. But the margins tell a different story. Someone, likely a bored cadet, has drawn what appears to be a stick figure urinating on a barbarian helmet. You appreciate the honesty. There are, of course, heroic epics too. A scroll tied with gold-threaded cord smells regal sandalwood, crushed petals, and sweet musk. Inside is the glorified account of a general who supposedly defeated 20,000 rebels with a force of 800. He claims divine intervention. The scroll includes verses praising his left arm. His left arm. You suspect embellishment. The scent is a dead giveaway. It's the kind of oil used in religious rites. Someone wanted this man remembered as half mortal, half miracle. Not all scrolls share that vanity. You find one that smells like dust, vinegar, and despair. The title, Retreat from the North. No ribbon, no seal. The text begins mid-sentence and ends abruptly. But in between, the writer describes frostbite, starvation, mutiny. His handwriting falters near the end. One phrase is scrawled 3 times. The map slide. You stare at the words longer than you mean to. And then you find a scroll that shouldn't be here. It's tucked behind a heavier document on siege mechanics. It smells like time and tears. Truly. Inside is a letter, not a report. A letter from a soldier to his sister. It begins, "If you are reading this, then the gods have left me on the field." He writes about missing figs from home, about the sound of bird song that reminds him of their garden, about how, when he oils his sword, he remembers the scent of their mother's hands after grinding herbs. It's not a scroll of war, it's a scroll of love. Trapped by accident or on purpose among the weapons, you close it carefully, let its scent linger, and then, at the far end of the shelves, you reach a final section. Here, the scrolls are oiled not with pine or pitch, but with myrrh, cinnamon, and something deep and resinous, the records of peace treaties. These texts are calmer, more hopeful. The scent choices here suggest clarity, finality, balance. You pause at a treaty between two warring provinces, signed after decades of bloodshed. The scroll smells of saffron and wet clay, hope and foundation. The first line reads, "We tire of funerals. Even Rome had its moments of mercy." You step away from the war wing, head buzzing, senses fogged with 100 kinds of bravery and fear. The scrolls were scented for glory, yes, but also for grief. And now, you smell something different entirely. It's sharp, bright, riddled with contradiction. Ink, parchment, brine, wine, citrus, and wax, and panic. The law scrolls are next. The scent of war lingers just behind you, pine smoke and old iron clinging to the folds of your robe. But ahead, the air sharpens, not with violence, but with something just as tense, judgment. You've reached the legal wing of the Roman library. It smells like rules. No, really, it does. The aroma is tidy, bitter, exacting. Ink, lemon rind, old parchment, vinegar polish, beeswax, and a very particular kind of aged citrus peel that seems to say, don't touch unless authorized. Even the air feels more orderly here. Crisp, unsympathetic, the scrolls are tightly wound, uniformly stacked, labeled with neat, burnt-in script. The scent coding here is severe, almost bureaucratic, but with a side of the theater. Because Roman law was nothing if not a performance, you start with a scroll titled Lex Cornelia de Falsis, a law against forgery. The scent, bay leaf and vinegar. Sharp, disapproving. Inside, the language is precise and humorless. Falsifying a will. Death. Counterfeit seals. Death. Pretending your mule has imperial lineage. Okay, maybe not death, but still serious business. The Romans had little patience for creative paperwork, and yet, irony dances through these scrolls. 1. Heavily oiled with lemon balm and pine resin. Covers trial procedures. It outlines how to properly accuse someone of theft, how to summon witnesses, and how to behave in court. You can almost hear the magistrate's voice echoing through the forum. But in the margins, there's graffiti. Someone scribbled a crude cartoon of a man slipping a coin to a judge under the table. Historians still argue whether the scenting of law scrolls was meant to impose discipline or simply keep clerks awake. Legal texts could be dry, so dry, in fact, that readers reportedly burned citrus oil candles nearby just to keep their minds alert. Over time, the oil got on the scrolls themselves, creating a scent tradition born of survival, not classification. There are scrolls here on property rights scented with cedar and clove to indicate land and value. Others, on marital law, were often marked with jasmine or lavender. One infamous scroll titled Concerning the Dowry of Flavia Minutia smells like expensive wine and regret. The writing is frantic, as if the scribe was trying to finish before the bride changed her mind. You find legal codes concerning debt, the scent, sharp fennel, and dried ink. One rule explains that if a debtor cannot pay within 30 days, they may be chained outside the forum, but only if it rains. If it doesn't, they must be given a woolen cloak. You're not sure which part of that is worse. Some of the oldest scrolls are cracked and flaking. They smell like dry parchment and ancient dust. These are the 12 tables. Rome's foundational laws. You unfurl a segment. It reads like a proto-constitution. Clear, blunt, vaguely terrifying. If a man sings a spell against another man or woman, let him be clubbed to death. A little harsh on poets, but classic Rome. Other laws show glimmers of fairness. One scroll smells of mint and chamomile. It describes labor protections for apprentices, how long they must work before earning full wage, and what recourse they have if their master strikes them without cause. The text is soft-spoken, almost paternal, a rare moment of mercy wrapped in legalese. But then you come to the strangest scroll of all. It's tied in red cord and smells strongly of onions and salt. You blink. Onions. You open it carefully. Inside is a list of legal exceptions made during a garlic shortage. Yes, that happened. Rome panicked. Prices spiked. Laws had to be drafted to regulate fair distribution. The scroll is frantic and weirdly personal. One clause reads, "No senator shall hoard more than 4 bulbs, nor trade with Greeks at inflated rates." That scent combination, onion oil and brine, became a brief but memorable part of the legal wing's scentscape. For decades after, any scroll involving trade violations was marked with just a hint of onion. Like a joke only the archivists understood. You stumble onto a scroll meant for public performance, a recitation of laws meant to remind the populace how not to get imprisoned. The scent is bold, myrrh and citrus, meant to grab attention. Inside, a kind of legal poetry. Rhymed clauses, chanted penalties. It was, effectively, a Roman legal rap battle. You're oddly impressed. Still, there were legal scrolls that were never meant to be read aloud. Some of these smell like rosewater and quiet panic. These were sealed documents, secret pardons, exile notices, blacklists. You find one that reads only, "Do not let him return." No name. No context. But the scent bitter almond and ash suggests a final decision. Another scroll is marked with the crest of a praetor. The scent, olive wood and something that smells faintly like shame. Inside, it details a trial that ended with both parties exiled for conduct unbecoming of citizens. No further elaboration. Someone didn't want this case remembered, but scent, as always, has a longer memory than ink. Some scrolls seem more ceremonial than practical. 1. Bound in gold-stamped ribbon and oiled with saffron and rose, proclaims a marriage contract between 2 high-ranking families. The scent alone must have cost a fortune. The actual text? Surprisingly dull. She shall bring 3 goats, 1 veil, and a villa. He shall bring his name. Typical. And then, tucked away at the back of the shelf, is a scroll with no ribbon, no wax, no scent. You pick it up. It's completely blank. No one knows why it's here. Maybe a forgotten draft. Maybe a warning. Maybe the only true law in Rome was silence. And someone wanted to say that without saying anything at all. You replace it with care. And as you step away from the legal wing, you begin to notice how the air has started to even out. The scents are fading, not gone, but blending. This means you're near the oldest section of all, the lost scrolls, the forgotten scents, the place where even classification failed. But before you drift into that final realm, let's ease your mind. Take a deep breath, because now it's time. You leave the law wing behind and wander into a corridor with no clear scent, no distinct memory, just the soft sigh of aged air. The library stretches endlessly now, scrolls packed so tightly they seem to hum. But they don't call to you, not anymore. Your steps slow. The candles flicker lower. Shadows drift like fog across the floor. The scent in the air is everything and nothing. A mix of sandalwood, lavender, ink, beeswax, and the faintest wisp of cedar smoke. It doesn't distract, it settles, and you let it all around you. Shelves whisper, not words, just presence, ancient quiet, still breathing. You pass a basket of worn scrolls whose labels have long faded. Their oils have dried, but the memory clings. Someone once oiled these with care. Someone once read them. By lamplight, just like you. You sit, no need to read anymore. You've traveled through death and birth, politics and philosophy, law and childhood, all through scent. A journey painted with perfume and papyrus. You imagine the scribes who worked here, the scent clerks, the scroll sorters, the daydreamers who dared to believe that the nose could lead knowledge through time. You smile, and you breathe in slow and deep. It smells like rest now, like cool linen and warm wood, like a page turning for the last time before the lights go out. You don't need to remember every scent. You just need to sleep. Shh, it's already begun.